Well, good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Greg Johnson with Loring Consulting Engineers, and I'm a member of the Illuminating Engineering Society. I'd like to welcome you to our presentation today on lighting terms, Shape My World, What's New? We have a great presentation lined up for you today, but before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. Feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many questions as time permits at the end of the presentation. And lastly, as a reminder, our presentations are recorded and archived, so you'll be able to view the presentation again, and also recommend to others who are not able to join today. And I'll place a link to the channel in the chat box section, and this will be posted on YouTube. And today, I'd be happy to welcome Bob Henderson and Terry McGowan, who will be providing basic, intermediate, and advanced level information on 5 lighting terms, along with the possible changes that will rock our lighting world. All types of lighting practitioners at all levels will want to tune in for this one. So first off, we have Bob Henderson. Bob has worked in the lighting industry as a consultant, lighting center principal instructor, lighting sales agent, utility lighting specialist, and director of lighting education at 2 training centers. He's worked with cities and towns across North Carolina and South Carolina to develop over 25 municipal lighting ordinances. He's on the NCQLP LC test committee for 10 years, chair for 2 years, and later as the senior advisor. He's the current U.S. lead instructor for the CLEP, Certified Lighting Efficiency Professional, sponsored by the Association of Energy Engineers. Bob is an emeritus member of the IES and received their Distinguished Service Award in 2023. Also, we have Terry McGowan. Terry is involved with illuminating engineering and lighting design, lighting education, and lighting research. His professional career is 60 plus years, which includes GE Lighting at Neela Park, where he was manager of GE Lighting Institute. These days, in addition to consulting work, he acts on behalf of the American Lighting Association as the Director of Engineering and Technology, and as Executive VP of the J.H. McClung Lighting Research Foundation. He is a fellow of the IES and the 2009 recipient of the IES Medal Award in recognition for his work as lighting educator, researcher, and author. Without further delay, let me introduce you to our speakers, Bob Henderson and Terry McGowan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob, and we have also Terry. Hi, Terry.
Good afternoon. It's a delight to be here. I've been, of course, on the IES program here before. We make it happen about every few years, but it's great to be back and to be part of the IES section here.
Well, we're so glad to have you. We really appreciate you doing this with us. And so we're going to get started here. And some of you may think, well, lighting terms, I already know all of this. There's nothing really to learn. Well, we hope to be able to share 3 different levels of lighting, the basic things, for those people who may be new. Maybe you've been in lighting for less than a year. You don't really know too much about the terms. You're still learning. That's great. And then an intermediate person, maybe has been working in lighting for 5 or 10 years, and you're familiar with everything, but it's not totally clear. Maybe some of those you don't remember or don't know. And then we have someone that is working in lighting for 10 years or longer, that's a senior, and has all the basics down. Of course, we are all still learning, even the basics, because they change so much in our industry. But you have mastered most all the things, and we want to share some new things and changes. So with that, we're going to see if we can get started. And so as we get into lighting terms, we want to consider these terms today. Foot candle, lux, lumen, glare and flicker, circadian lighting, and color. Not necessarily in that order, but that's all we're going to talk about. So let's get started. So first of all, the lumen. So I'm going to use just a typical layman's definition. Terry may come in and talk a little bit more about the higher quality or higher technical definition, but lumen is just the total quantity of light emitted from a light source, just like a candle. So how much light do we get out of that? Then we have initial lumens. So initial lumens, we have two sources here. Well, we'll roll them all into traditional light sources. And so lumens, we rate lumens after what we call a burn-in period. Now, in the traditional world, when I first started in lighting, they varied. So, for instance, a fluorescent lamp would be after stabilization, which takes about 200 hours. And so it's much more before it actually stabilizes. That's the way the lamps are rated. But in LEDs, believe it or not, actually, the light actually increases very slightly as the burn hours continue, and then it levels off. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So just a slight little curve there. So going a little further with our lumens, we have maintained lumens. Now, still talking about traditional lighting and LEDs. So traditional light sources, that is 40% of the average rated life. It's what some people used to call that design lumens. Maintained lumens is what that is. However, in LEDs, we don't use that terminology. We have something called an L70. And so as an example, that's the default. And that is when 30% of the initial lumens have depreciated. And so you say, well, and there are something available, an L90, an L80. So L70 is the kind of the one that's you hear the most. You say, well, why is that? And so that's the point at where the eye can actually detect a change in the level of light. So that's the most popular one used by the standards most often. Now, going on into this a little bit, so you have the lamp lumen depreciation curves. Over here in the green that you don't really see much definition on, that's all the traditional light sources, and then you see the blue line. So you'll see this is a long line that goes all the way across. And so after 24,000 hours, the LEDs have depreciated about 2%. Then 50,000 hours, 70%, 7%. And then all the way out to 100,000 hours is what we're looking at for this example. It's 100,000 hours. Now, it says less than 14%. Well, if you look at the standards, the L70 at 100,000 hours, well, L70, that should be 30%, not 14%. So what's going on here? So this is where you as a specifier, if you're trying to determine the difference between luminaire A and luminaire B, this is one source to look at to determine the particular luminaires that you're looking at, which one actually depreciates less as far as lumen depreciation. So you want to look into the TM21 report for your luminaire. So it should be there. If it's not, then your manufacturer can furnish that for you. And reps. So if your luminaire is looking good, like this one would be, at a depreciation of 14% instead of 30%, that's a good differentiating factor that you want to bring to the attention of your specifier. So just a good little thing to know to really drill in. All they're doing is the L70 at 30%. Or 70%, L70, that's just a pass-fail. So they must meet this criteria or they don't get that approval. So, but just because they get a check mark for a 30%, your luminaires could be higher. So it's a good place to check. Now moving on to lumens and the human eye. So we have our pupil and a smaller pupil size. It covers the eye defects or the aberrations in the eye. And so if you go to the center field of vision of your eye, your visual performance is improved. That's the fovea. So the two ways to reduce this pupil size and get zeroed in is one is increase the lumens. The problem with that is when we increase the light level, we typically use more energy. So is there another way? So there is another way, and that is to change the color of the light and add more blue into the light source. So the eye is very sensitive to blue light. So by adding a higher temperature with more blue in the source, then you're going to be able to shrink that pupil size and your clarity is going to improve. Now let's go a little deeper into this. So we're getting into the intermediate level now. So photopic lumens is what the IES standards are based on. So the photopic is the standard, and it has more of the yellow and orange spectral power. So when we say spectral power, we don't mean electrical power. We need how strong is the curve, or how much spectral power, how much color is in that particular wavelength. That's what we're talking about, spectral power. So you'll see there that the photopic is right at 555 nanometers. Now, nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter, and we're on the visual energy spectrum. So to the left is X-rays, and to the right is infrared. And so we're into the part of the lighting where we can see. As part of what we call this curve that we're seeing is called the spectral power distribution curve. Now, there's another term called scotopic. Some people have nicknamed this the visual effective lumens. You don't hear that too often, but you do hear it. And so it's got more of the blue-green spectral power of the light, and it peaks at 507 nanometers. So you see the blue curve there, and you see the red curve, okay? So this is a different peak of the most light that you see is at that level. Now, there's a downside to using a lot of blue light. So the downside is that it also provides poorer color rendition. So we need to, it's not all about always just getting the highest efficiency. It's getting the highest efficiency and also maintaining the environment that we would, things look good, people look good, the surroundings look good, and so forth. So it's that blend. And just to let you know where the technical memorandum is that talks about this scotopic lighting, it's in ANSI IES TM 24-20. And then our goal, again, as we just mentioned, is to provide the highest visibility possible without sacrificing color rendering or mood setting, if that is important. Every application is different. Some of you may know that working in industrial environments, the standard there is 5000 K. Not so in a high-end restaurant. So it's a whole different ball game there. So Terry, what is new in the way of lumens today?
Well, the lumen is really an odd unit. It represents light becoming personal. Lighting measurements typically are scientific measurements. They don't vary. But the lumen is an exception, and it opens the door to making light for people because the lumen is very much people-oriented. It isn't the way animals or any other living creature sees light. The lumen is unique to people. So if you think you have a lot of light for yourself, you may not have as much light for, let's say, the dog in the room or the chickens in the barn or other creatures that have a very different curve than that curve that Bob showed you, which I've repeated down here in the lower right. So it's changing electromagnetic waves or photons into light that's visible for people. And this is very important because if lighting is for people, that means there's a quality component. A lumen of light and many lumens of light, say in a home or an office or a factory, has more than just light associated with it. There is color, of course, there is glare, there is flicker, there are other problems that tend to reduce the quality of that light or make it uncomfortable. And so the lumen is the basic measurement, but it's the way we tinker with that lumen when we try to provide it with an LED system today that really makes it complicated. And so that's what lighting design is all about, and lighting quality is all about. The lumen is an old thing too, and I looked up the history of it. It's 1894. It was a French physicist, this fellow Andre Eugene Blondel, and he did some tests over in France that determined the value of the lumen. But here right away is a problem. Does everybody see that same lumen? What about people over in Asia or Africa? Very different makeup, very different kinds of human beings. Are those eyes the same? Well, nobody has really ever checked that. But our guess is, in the lighting industry anyway, that yeah, people see light differently, and we should know that. That should be incorporated into the lumen. So we could say the lumen is really obsolete. It's old. Everybody agrees on it globally, or they say they do, but it doesn't necessarily reflect what all people see, or even an average of that. So one of the things that the standards folks try to do, and that of course includes the Illuminating Engineering Society, but the International Standards Organization is the International Commission on Illumination, or CIE. Now, I don't know if any of you are members of the CIE. You can be. The U.S. is a member of the CIE, and so anybody who wants to join the U.S. National Committee of the CIE can also join the CIE and be part of this whole standards setting idea. If that's your thing, this is a great thing to do. I've been a member for quite a few years. So we can be part of this standards thing and make sure they're doing it right. Somebody has to. And it's very important if we do lighting to make sure that it's right, because we are hemmed in by regulations such as lumens per watt for efficacy. So we have to be sure that the units that we're using reflect not only the amount of light, but also the color or quality of light characteristics that are important to us. All the other units that we use in light come from the lumen, the candela, luminous intensity, lux and foot candles. Foot candles, of course, lumens per square foot, lux lumens per square meter. All of those are derived, and we have to figure out, do we want to go with that, or do we want to update it? So that's one of the biggest questions that's facing the lighting industry globally today is, what should we do with the lumen? And you'll be hearing a lot more about that. So, Bob, that's what's new, and there's a lot of work
Okay,
to do.
excellent. Thank you. So let's go on to color. And first, we'll introduce color temperature. It's the appearance of light source, looking at the source. How warm or how cool is that light? It's measured in degrees Kelvin. So you'll see over there, one morning I woke up early and started to go out and get a little breakfast and noticed the sunrise. And this is about 1800 K for sunrise. And the color temperature is correlated to a reference source. We typically use what we call the black body radiator. And so therefore, we use a term called color temperature. So CCT, correlated color temperature, is what we think of because it's referenced back to the heating of an object, which is, if you can imagine, a black body radiator. So thus it becomes correlated color temperature. So a higher color temperature might be a cooler appearance, maybe 5,000 K or even higher, 6,500 K, and a lower color temperature might be maybe around incandescent of 2,700 K. If you look over in the gas burner over to the right, so you say, well, which one is hotter? Of course, the blue flame is going to be hotter, so you're going to have a higher CCT, versus a yellow flame is lower, so it's going to have a lower CCT. Just like you're heating an object, the flame turns from yellow to blue with the increase in temperature. That's how you can understand Kelvin and Kelvin temperature. Now we're going to jump into the intermediate level just a second regarding CCT. Have you noticed that in the old days, maybe you've seen a fluorescent lamp by manufacturer A and manufacturer B, and even though they were both rated at 3,500, you look at the lamps and they're not exactly the same color temperature, right? Or Kelvin, I should say. And so that's right. And so guess what? We have the same exact issue going on with LEDs. So how can you get further definition? Let's get a little more granular, get in the weeds a little bit further. There's something called DUV. So it's the metric to describe the difference in colors beyond the CCT. So we see that black body, that the line here, and with the different temperatures. Now there's a tolerance that is allowed around a 3,000 or 4,000, whatever it is. There's a tolerance. So if you go up above the line, then you on the black body curve, you see the yellow and the green. Okay, that's the plus side. And then if you go below that is where you see the negative. You see the pink and the red side. So depending on the value of the DUV, which is in the TM30, 21, TM21, you can actually determine, well, if I'm looking at A and B and I want an exact match, without actually looking at them physically, the next closest thing that you can do other than just say, well, they're both 3,500, you can get the DUV. And you'll be able to tell a pretty good value there. So let's talk about this in terms of LED for a second. So there was a customer, they had an open area, kind of an open office area, and there was one manufacturer, and they provided the luminaires. And then in one area, there was an inspection, all open in one area, but they wanted more light. So what they did is they specified the same manufacturer, but a high output version of that fixture. Okay. So it turns out that there was a different chipset used for the high output by a different manufacturer. And so when they put those fixtures in, same grid pattern, guess what? You could tell the difference in the CCT with your eye. That wasn't good. So I don't know if maybe the particular person was not able to check the DUV. You say, well, what am I going to do? How can I fix this problem? Well, the obvious fix is to go back and use the same fixture that you used in the non-inspection area, but use more fixtures. So rather than maybe it's a 2x fixture on maybe an 8x8 grid, maybe you use a 6x6 grid, or I don't know, but you put more fixtures in to raise the light level, and then you also have the same CCT. So we're faced with things like these all the time. So the DUV provides a better indication of exactly what the color of a CCT will look like, and this could be written into a specification with a tolerance. So that maybe gives you a little bit of help and guidance to avoid what could be an expensive mistake. CRI, everybody in the lighting world knows, is color rendering index, is the appearance of colored objects when viewed under a light source compared to a reference light source of the same CCT. So it ranges from 0 to 100. Now, let's be careful about this. So it's from 2,000 K to and including or equal to 5,000 K is the incandescent, is the reference source, and then above 5,000 K is daylight. Two reference sources is what the comparison is. Now, when you look at CRI, it's been around since the early 1960s, and so there's 8 pastel colors that we use here, and there's 6 saturated colors that are secondary. And you'll notice that they're not part of the rating. So you take these 8 pastel colors and average them, and then that's the way you get your rating of your CRI. But you'll notice that the R9, which is the red, is not included in that CRI measurement. Now, another thing to remember here is when we're looking at the different CRIs, we need to also use the same CCT. Otherwise, your comparison is invalid. So you see this apple, and all of those use the 2700, but you got different varying CRIs. Now, beyond this, why should you care about the R9? Here's a little example here, a real story. Friendly's restaurant, a gentleman ordered a rare steak. They had compact fluorescent with a R9 value of 0. Brought it out, and so it said, this is not rare. This is medium. Took it back in the kitchen, put it under your incandescent lighting. No, it looked like this. An R9 of 90. Compact fluorescents have a very low R9, while other sources have a very high R9, could have. So that's why R9 is important. In fact, it's really written into the California code, a JA8, for that you must be equal to or greater than 50 for R9 value. Now, moving on from that, we get now our TM30-18. Instead of 8 colors, guess what? We use 99 colors, both saturated and unsaturated, but there's 2 metrics now, not just one. So the first one is fidelity. Think of fidelity with 99 colors like you think of CRI with 8 colors, okay? But we're adding a new one called gamut. So what is gamut? So gamut is saturation is one word, chroma is another word, vividness is another word. How red is your red? Or how blue is your blue? And so you say, well, I don't think maybe I don't really need to do that. So let's take a look here. So we're going to look at a comparison where we have fidelity changes. Again, think about under the light with CRI. Okay, and we're going to fidelity changes, and we hold the gamut the same. So here's a group of items, and we don't have a lot of change. We go from 65 fidelity to 95. Okay, with a 100 gamut, which is the baseline. Now let's look and do the opposite. Fidelity stays the same and gamut changes. So this is a 65 fidelity, 80 gamut. Now we have a 120 gamut. So wow, it makes a huge change. Say, okay, I believe you, Bob. So what else can you tell me? So how do you use this in specification? So we're going to go into PVF. What does that stand for? So now we're going into the advanced level. So first of all, let's learn the metrics in this table to be able to specify our design intent. So this is for a lighting designer. And so we want to get very particular about the colors. So first of all, we're going to introduce, there's something called P or preference. That is, what is your preference? And then we have something called vividness or saturation that we just covered. And then something called fidelity, which we just covered. Okay. Now, inside the table, you've got to know a little more. So this is the RF. So it means the fidelity. Okay. Must be, in this case, it says greater than 75. The RG is talking about the gamut that we just used. And then the CSH1. So we haven't introduced that yet. So that's the chroma shift. So we're talking about that chroma, okay, or the vividness. And then it says H1. H1 stands for red. Okay. So now we've introduced, and then here's our RFH1. So the red part of the fidelity. So we have a red rating of gamut and a red rating of fidelity. All right. Now, so you say, okay, so I've got several layers I've got to consider here. So now we're going to look at the priority. So you have a priority of 1, 2, 3. So priority 1 is the highest priority. Okay, that's your first choice. And then we have something where we rate these P1. So that is preference with a priority of 1, P2, and P3. We do the same thing for vividness, 1, 2, and 3 in priority level, and the same thing for fidelity, 1, 2, and 3. Say, okay, great, Bob, this is great information. How do I use this? So let's assume that the color specification using TM30 could be a P1, V1, F2. So we go to the P1, and so we read this, we say that the RF is greater than 78, the RG is greater than or equal to 95, and then down the RCS is less than or greater or equal to -1, and the CSH1 is less than or 15%. Okay, so that's the one. We do the same thing similar. We read the values for the V1 and the F2. This is our specification. So, as we mentioned, this is intended to be used by lighting designers to specify exactly the desired effective color rendition on the lighting environment they're working with, okay? So let's see if we can put all this together and what this means. So if the spec is our same spec, which is P1, V1, F2, then let's zero in and look at the preference. We've just discussed this. Here it is again, the same numbers we just looked at. Here is the next slide for vividness. Here is the next slide for fidelity. So once you get used to working with this, you're going to say, you know what, I've got some pretty high numbers here in the preference. This is really important to me. And my vividness, I really want that strong. I want a high chroma, vividness, saturation. Fidelity is kind of middle of the road. So it's got to get a 2 rating. So you got it. So what does all this mean? Describe what we have just specified. Well, I just did that. And so my preference is strong. I want high vividness and saturation, and my fidelity is medium to high. Okay. So, wow, we got through that, right? So this is what it means. This is the way right here, before we ask Terry to come in and comment. So lighting designers, if you want to zero in and get exactly what you want, this is the new way that the IES Color Committee has introduced Annex E to TM30. There will be a user's guide written by the committee. It hasn't come out yet. So almost no one, I'm not aware of anyone that's presented slides like we're doing today that teaches these principles. This is what the guide is going to teach you when it comes out. Terry, what do you say?
I'd say it's a complicated subject.
It is. It's at the advanced level.
Yeah, and you just heard it, and I think Bob has done a great job of simplifying it as much as possible, even for lighting specifiers like yourselves and people that are part of the lighting industry. I've been working in recent years, however, with the residential lighting folks, with the American Lighting Association as their director of engineering. And so I talk with consumers, I talk with lighting showrooms, and when they try to get this message across to consumers, the first thing is the consumer will say, it's not too complicated. It's too complicated. I don't understand it. So how do we make this understandable? Well, I put together something here, and it's a little more complicated than it should be, because all of a sudden now our good standard friends at the CIE have said, whoops, wait a minute. And this happened just a month ago. This was something that happened in February. They now recommend that the CIE and the IES color rendering index, so that's R sub A that Bob talked about, be replaced by the CIE General Color Fidelity Index, R sub F. So R sub A is going to disappear. What we have called color rendering index for a long time, many years, going to disappear according to the CIE, and we're going to use something called R sub F now. And the reason for that is simply this. If you look at those color samples that Bob showed you for R sub A, those 8 color samples, okay, they're fine, but they were developed in an age of incandescent lighting and fluorescent lighting when the color variations were not at all like what we have today with LEDs. So R sub A is very limited in how it uses color and reports it in numbers. If we want to do a better job, let's go to R sub F, which uses that color standard that Bob showed you with many, many more colors. In other words, we're taking into account the effect of LEDs coming into and becoming the major light source we'll be using, and the color variability of LEDs is almost infinite. So we've got to have more colors to use as references. And so we're going from RA to RF, and that's what the CIE is recommending to make that happen. So it's going to be a little bit of a problem, but I think if you want to be sure that people understand, especially consumers understand, they need good color rendering. They need good color appearance, not only of themselves, but of the objects and rooms and spaces around them. Get the RF rating, and that will put you on the right track, especially when you're using LEDs. Okay, Bob, that's
Okay, very good. So let's go to our next topic. Very simple lighting terms, right? So you're beginning to see there's a lot to this, or there can be a lot to this. And so you as a lighting practitioner, as you work with your customers, knowledge is power. So the more you know, the better of a advisor, a trusted advisor you will become. And so let's go to our next topic, foot candles or lux. So actually, if you get very granular, 10.76 lux equals 1 foot candle. Guess what? The IES gives us a break, and they say we're going to round this off to 10. So 10 lux equals 1 foot candle to make it easy for us. And so we see here high foot candles, the way most foot candle measurements are, or I should say horizontal, the way they're performed. When I first came in lighting, I just learned horizontal. Very rarely did I ever think about vertical. And so vertical foot candles are typically the way we see. A few things are solely horizontal, but many, many things are vertical. So vertical foot candles have become very predominant and very prominent also in the recent years because guess what? Circadian. We're going to go over that shortly. So it's how much light is hitting the eye. The eyes are vertical. So it's much more prominent than it was before we considered that. And the vertical light, however, can increase the amount of glare. Again, something we're going to talk about today, which then reduces visibility. So this idea of reducing visibility is important. So we want to have low glare vertical light. That is oftentimes our goal. And something else called a high vertical to high horizontal content. So this horizontal foot candle ratio becomes important. And the idea, many of you remember of the introduction of a term that was initially kind of associated with one particular supplier and actually became adopted by the IES as a term called volumetric. And so with volumetric lighting filling the entire space, the vertical to horizontal ratio becomes closer to 1, which is becoming very, very important when we talk about circadian. So Terry, what do you know about what's going on with foot candles today?
The foot candle is alive and well. I can say that. And of all the measurements that we have for lighting, the foot candle is the easiest to make. It is probably one of the most important because so many specifications call for it. And it is also inexpensive. Now, I've looked into that. One of my first activities in lighting was doing lighting measurements. So I learned a lot about foot candle meters. And if you have a chance, if you have one, or if you have a chance to buy one as part of your practice, whatever you do, here's what I would suggest. Make sure that the meter is cosine and color corrected. How do you know that? Well, you know that because, first of all, the cell should be separate from the meter, from what you read. And the pictures that I've gotten here, particularly the first 2 or 3, show you how that works. In other words, put the cell at the end of a wire that reads into the meter that you hold in your hand. so that what the cell receives is not influenced by you. In other words, having a body there leaning over trying to read it will affect the lighting that gets into the cell. We don't want that. Although I have heard some people say they wear particular clothing to maybe modify that a little bit. I don't recommend that whatsoever. So color and cosine correction means that you're correcting for angle. You want all light from all angles to come into that cell to tell you what the total foot candles are. And you also want color correction so that you're matching the color response of the human eye, what we talked about before. This is something, by the way, that your cell phone cannot do. If you're using a cell phone for foot candle measurements, the answer is always wrong compared to a proper measurement with color and cosine correction. Also, if you're getting a foot candle meter, ask about, can it be calibrated and serviced? The better ones can. The inexpensive ones, and I'm talking $25 to $50, cannot. So you're thinking about costs in the $100 range or less to get a good foot candle meter, and it will be your best friend when you have to put facts to what you say about lighting. Court cases and legal actions often involve illumination levels. And one of the things that I do in practice is I make sure that if I'm, let's say, lighting a retirement community step or walkway, that I use the IES levels as the standard because they are standards. And that way, if I have at least the IES level on those surfaces, that's a very hard thing to get around legally. If somebody says, well, there's not enough light, I tripped, I fall, I'm going to sue you for $10,000 or something. It gets into the legal aspects of lighting, and the foot candle is usually the basic measurement. So one other thing to think about when you get a foot candle meter is you're measuring fractions of a foot candle for outdoor lighting. Often illuminance values for outdoor lighting, let's say for street lighting, roadway lighting, pathway lighting, and so forth, are 1 foot candle or less. So you have to be able to measure that fraction of a foot candle. Make sure that your foot candle meter can do that and do that accurately. And a good foot candle meter, as I said, is a very good friend to have. And I use mine quite a bit for just measuring, well, today, circadian lighting, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But circadian lighting will be more and more important, as Bob suggested, because we're not just measuring illumination on a surface, we're measuring illumination that gets into the eye. And that's a very different kind of measurement indeed. So Bob, let's talk about some of the other quality factors too of lighting.
Let's do. So the next one we have is glare. So the first thing you see is, headlights coming into your eyes. I'm sure all of you have faced this and you say, I can't see. But what we want to mention is there are really 2 types of glare. There is discomfort glare, which is an annoyance caused by bright light. It's very difficult to measure. It's not impossible, very difficult. And then disability glare, a reduction in vision caused by scattered light, which can be measured. So discomfort glare and disability glare. But the bottom line is I can't see, or I can't see as well as I did before. So there's something today called UGR, and in the old days, there was something called VCP. So unified glare rating, there are values here. And so this is a little scale here to give you an idea of what this criterion is. The glare rating and the Hopkins discomfort glare criteria is if you increase in numbers, you get worse. And so that has something to do with the mounting height, of course. But you'll see a 19 for UGR is just acceptable, and then 22 is unacceptable, and then you get all the way up to 28 and so forth. Now, this is for any light sources. Now, the old formula or the old standard was visual comfort probability. This was really only for like a fluorescent lighting for like a classroom and so forth. So you get 100 participants in a room and you ask the question, how many of you are not comfortable with this system? It wasn't really intended for high bay, but it got out there and some people, it kind of went away. It was very popular at one time in Florida for schools. But we kind of there's a chart here kind of comparing the two to give you a little bit of a flavor if you're really familiar with VCP. Now, human perception of flicker. So this is a problem. It can be a problem, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's give you the ratings first of all. So from 3 to 50 hertz, easily seen by most everyone, the flicker. The critical flicker fusion, sensitive individuals, Arsberger's syndrome, epilepsy, so forth, 50 to 90 hertz. Invisible, strobe light interference, 90 to 3000. And then above 3000 hertz, most tests will agree no stroboscopic or negative effects from the light. That is as of what we've been saying today, at any percentage of modulation. Okay, so you see, I get an idea here of the one on the left. You see some flicker going on. We're going to take a closer look. The one over on the right is smooth. Okay, let's take a little closer look here, and many of you will recognize this is Naomi Miller. A few years ago, we were down in New Orleans, and she gave a talk on flicker at the annual conference. And so she's going to mention something I want to introduce before we watch the video. So she's going to refer to something called a 30% duty cycle of LEDs. So if there is a 1 second cycle, then the LEDs will be on. So it's an on-off duty cycle. So on for 0.3 seconds and off for 0.7. So you're going to be, it's in a state of dimming. So a lower percentage duty cycle means that the light will be dimmer. And she'll also give you a hertz rating, which will give you an idea based on what we just said. So this is the pulse width modulation, which is one form of LED dimming. Okay, so if you have the driver on the source side of the driver, you have direct current, and so it's pulse width modulation. And this is what it looks like as far as you have on and then you have off, and you see the in between there where you have the cycle. Okay, so with that preparation, now let's take a look. I shot this video myself. Naomi knows I use this. So let's see what she has to say.
600 hertz, still 30% duty cycle. Some of you may see it, may depend on how far away you are, and some may not. Does anyone see stripes? Yeah, probably depending on the distance. Some of you may see it. Most of you probably won't.
Okay, so I had a great idea in my earlier days, and I said, well, you know what, we can fix this. So I came up with this little handy dandy chart, and let's just, if you got a lot of flicker, what's the quality of your driver and so forth. And I just came up with this and checked so forth. And I said, Naomi, what do you think about this? She said, can't use it. No, can't do that. Can't do that. So what it amounts to is that, and this is a little bit of an update from a previous speaker at one of our Lighthouse presentations, what I'm getting ready to say. The amount of flicker is not directly related to the quality level or the price of the driver. At PNNL, she has tested some high quality drivers with a significant amount of flicker. She's also tested some less expensive drivers with almost no flicker. So that's not the answer. I wish it was. I wish we could simplify your world, but this is what's made the world of flicker more important, and that is the phantom ray effect. You see those tail lights, the way they look, is added complexity to us solving the problem. So each combination of driver and dimmer will have its own flicker results. Okay. So just eliminating the low-cost drivers and or the dimmers is not the answer to flicker, unfortunately. So to date, there is not an approved industry-wide standard to address flicker. Now you understand a little bit why. This could change monthly, however. And so Terry is in meetings with Naomi and others on this regarding glare and flicker. So Terry, give us please a little bit of an update on these two.
Oh, glad to do that, Bob, and everyone. I listed here just kind of for your reference the quality factors for LED lighting, and it's obviously the LED age, so LEDs are going to be important for the foreseeable future. And the two in red, the glare control and the flicker, are two that we don't have good answers for, and the reason is we don't have good metrics for the problem. In other words, if you can't measure it, it's very hard to improve lighting quality. And of course, if you're a specifier, you can't specify it very easily either. So that's the dilemma that we're in. And as Bob just said, with flicker, our flicker metrics are, well, they're incomplete. We have some, but that was before we really understood how flicker can go. And when I talked to Naomi, and it was yesterday about this, she's doing some flicker studies. She said, we have to really be honest and say, some people can see flicker up at 10,000 hertz. It isn't invisible. To most, it may be, but if you are sensitive to it, that flicker will come into your eyes, into your brain, and it will cause problems, whether they're headaches or other problems. It's up to that individual. But we have to be able to control flicker. How do you control flicker in an LED? You do it in the driver. There's nothing you can do with the LED itself. So you build a driver that does not have flicker characteristics for the situation that you're using the LED for. And especially if you're dimming that LED with a standard dimmer, you've got to be very careful because flicker can raise its ugly head and drive people nuts. When I go to conferences, sometimes I'll meet with Naomi and we'll walk around here, there, and everywhere. And there are rooms when she'll have to leave because flicker is bothering her. And that applies to many other people. And I've known some you probably have too. So this whole idea of flicker is being solved, but it's a slow process. And Naomi is doing some work on it. The other researcher is Dr. Jennifer Veach, and some of you may know that name. She is with the she's a Canadian, and she runs the research center up in Canada for the Canadian government. So she is also, by the way, the president, the acting president now of the CIE for a 4-year term. So she and Naomi have gathered together and have delved into how we do better metrics for glare and how we do better metrics for flicker. But this is going to take a little while, and we have to use common sense in the meantime so that we have high quality LED lighting. LEDs, by the way, if there's flicker to be had, LEDs will have it because they can turn on and off very quickly, which is the definition of flicker really, much more quickly than an incandescent lamp or even a fluorescent lamp. Incandescent is a very low flicker product because it involves the heat of the filament, and you can't change that temperature of that filament very quickly, so it doesn't flicker very much. But when you get into LEDs, they can flicker very quickly, and they will lead to those things that we've talked about, stroboscopic effect, phantom array effects, and so forth that Naomi was demonstrating. So it's a problem for us as designers, as people with products to sell, as people who want to do the best job we can with a lighting installation. But flicker has to be considered, even if you can't see it. And I would urge you to ask the questions of people who experience those systems. Do you see any flicker? Is anything bothering you? Or use those very simple tests that Naomi showed you with a pencil, waving it back and forth. If you don't see a smooth pattern, if that pattern jumps and moves around, then you've probably got a flicker problem and somebody will be hurt by that in some way, shape, or form. So, Bob, that's the best we can do right now on flicker and glare control, I think. But we're going to get there because there are some good people doing good research.
And one other thing I know that they're studying. So if you're a person that is, in terms of flicker, is in the normal range and so forth. So what is the effect of being under LED lighting for 40 years? So we don't know exactly. So as Terry mentioned, with the high modulation and the hertz and so forth. So I recently went to an ophthalmologist and had some checkups and so forth, and I was having a little problem with feeling like something was in my eye. And anyway, and she made a comment to me. She said, "Well, here's the thing." Said, "You went through a generation of with a lot of screen time with your computer." So what we're seeing now is, as a doctor of the eye, is people that did that and had a large number of hours, we're seeing things that we don't see otherwise. So anyway, it's very interesting to move to, we won't spend any more time on it, but let's go to our circadian. So humans are generally active during the day and we're asleep at night, right? Goes back to the caveman. So here we respond to the day and the night in our environment. We have a time clock of 24 hours a day. Guess what? Our body clock is 24 hours and 20 minutes. So if we have proper circadian rhythm, all these things, we're awake, alert, productive, ready to go. We sleep soundly at night. And if we're disrupted, then we having a problem getting sound sleep, feeling down and depressed, increase in stress, poor coordination, can't think straight. And you said, I wonder what was wrong with me. So it could be part of this because your circadian may be out of cycle. So what are the factors? Now, this is an important thing to note right here, and I'm going to introduce something that is a little bit of a difference in the industry right now regarding the standards. So first of all, it's the amount of light. And then the distribution of that light. Now, these are two factors. However, some people are narrowing these from 5 to 4, so they're calling it the quantity. I think this is going backwards. So the quantity of light doesn't tell you very much. It is the compromise between the amount and distribution. But when you say the words amount and then what is the distribution, you learn a lot more about it than you just say quantity. So I'm going to continue to use the 5 metrics rather than the 4, but you are going to hear 4 metrics being used out there, and this is what this means. Also, the timing of the light. Is it at nighttime or is it during the daytime? When is it? And then the thing that everybody is focused on, the spectrum or the spectral power distribution, so forth. And then last is how long were the lights on and how long were they off? So those are the factors. There is a RP46-23, and here are some outcomes from this document. So the IES in RP46 has the equivalent melanopic lux, EML. It was adopted as the IES recommended standard. Now, there's been some heavy discussion on this, and I'm being nice when I say that. So it's TBD, stay tuned. However, that's the way it is right now. Lower recommended interior light levels at IES may not be enough for circadian lighting. So an increase in light level will likely require an increase in input watts, more energy. This is not good, right? So low glare lighting with improved vertical, here we go again, vertical to horizontal foot candle ratio closer to 1.0 will make a big difference, i.e. volumetric lighting, so forth. So the way we design the lighting to account for and maximize the benefit of circadian health, it's going to kind of change the way we do things, maybe from just the past of just worrying about how much light we have on the horizontal surface. And so I think we need to consider all 5 factors and not just spectra and not just 4 factors. So Terry, what do you see going on in your world regarding circadian today?
Oh, there is lots, and I know we're running out of time here, so I'll try to be brief. Where we are is where that little red arrow is in my top of the screen there. We've gone through the theory, we've gone through the research. The research now dates back 30 some years, so there's plenty of it. It's been verified in numerous ways, and now we're entering the practice of circadian lighting. How do we design it? How do we optimize it? How do we apply it? And to whom and to where should it be applied? It all boils down to this idea of human bodies need bright days and dark and dim afternoons, evenings, and no light at night. That's the best circadian lighting that can be provided for the human body. And there are groups in the lighting industry that are working on it. The American Lighting Association has a program called Better Light, Better Sleep. That's for residential lighting. It's designed to put products into the market for residential applications. It includes lights, lamps, controls, as well as lighting fixtures. There is a European group called the Good Light Group, and you can look this up. They have a very interesting web page, and it draws from throughout Europe, and it's very easy to understand. Excuse me. The WELL building standard has included it, so we're seeing it built into both commercial and high-end residential lighting, and then there is a UL guideline on it. Underwriters Laboratories has put a guideline out called DG 24480 that talks about how you apply circadian lighting and the recommendations that you need to follow. So this works pretty well for applications where we need to begin to specify it. And Bob, if you'll change it to the next slide, let me show you an example. Here's our circadian lighting system. This is in a retirement community. It is about, 3 months old, and it uses the most recent ideas. So the goal here is bright days, less light in the afternoon and evening, and dim nights. What we chose, or what the designer chose, this was an architect who was involved, chose as he wanted to have 35 to 40 foot candles at the eye during the day. That's the circadian dose that he was trying to provide. And he designed the space around that idea, both in terms of lighting fixtures, as well as reflectances of surfaces and the area of those surfaces. So what I did, my part of this, was taking illuminance measurements and saying, okay, what kind of a pattern do we need of changing illumination levels and chromaticity and color during the day and during the evening. So that's an automatic program that was applied to this space. And we can provide that light, and I was just amazed by this. When I took vertical and horizontal illuminance measurements, they were almost exactly equal, no matter where I was in the space and in what direction I looked. So I would call it a success. His lighting designers did it right. And they put, as you see, a variety of fixtures here. You'll see in the background a different chromaticity on some of those. That means the system is going through a change. It updates once an hour in both illumination level and chromaticity changes. And then it is programmed automatically through that 24-hour a day activity. You notice in the back of the picture too, there's a daylight wall. So in days, people can move over there. They can sit in chairs and talk to each other. They can have meals there, and that helps the situation. We don't need as much electric lighting, of course, if we have outdoor daylight. So this is what they look like. And then in the lower left corner here, to add more to that vertical illuminance, there are panels like this scattered throughout. They look decorative, but they are actually providing more vertical illumination in the space. So these are some of the things that we think about when we talk about circadian lighting and make it practical for lighting designs that we are putting into spaces. And it is a growing problem. We find it in schools, we find it in offices, and this is particularly where people maybe, like in New York City, they come to work in the dark, they work in an enclosed office, they don't get out into the sunshine or daylight even. Windows may not be nearby, and then they go home in the dark. Certainly certain times of the year, that's it. Their circadian rhythm will be terrible. And putting it back into shape does improve the quality of sleep and does improve the quality of life in many respects if it's done properly. And you'll see some in those references that I mentioned. So Bob, this is new. We are certainly taking a lot of interest in this. It's adding value to lighting, and it takes us well beyond. Do you have enough light to see? Is there glare? No, light is for health too. And I heard one lighting researcher some years ago put it all together in a sentence. He said, lighting is not just for vision anymore. And that's the lighting industry that we are in right now.
Very good. Well, thank you, Terry, for joining us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We're going to stop the recording now.